Does popular media objectify women? Does it exploit women? Does it engage in portrayals of women that are demeaning and disrespectful? And why is there so much pornography and erotic entertainment available these days? Why does so much of that entertainment seem designed to appeal to men? This is a concern that you'll hear from feminists and progressives, but you'll also hear this concern coming from people of faith and traditionalists. When people discuss this notion of objectification, it's typically spoken of as though this is something that is done to women, and done presumably to satisfy men, or to satisfy what feminists would call the male gaze. But is any of this true? Does this perception hold up to scrutiny? Where exactly do these ideas come from? Does society, in fact, sacrifice the virtue of women in order to appeal to men? I think some of this perception comes from the fact that, in the past, women who wanted to participate in this type of media, they typically had to go through a man. There was a time when women were dependent on middlemen merchants of sort to facilitate their efforts in these industries. Now, it wasn't always men. There are famous examples of women from history who profited off the commodification of other women. But for the most part, it was men, and sometimes women had to depend on very sleazy and dangerous men. So I think people developed this idea that women, even those who appeared to be engaged in these activities consensually, that they were really coerced or conned in some way. Now, I never agreed with this analysis. I was always skeptical of it. But one modern development that has completely undermined this notion that women are being exploited or objectified in media is the explosion of social media and the extent to which many women will use social media platforms to flaunt their sex appeal. The advent of the selfie has demonstrated that many women willingly choose to share this type of content without the facilitation or encouragement of any middleman. It's amazing to me how much of this content is out there. And even on the more tame platforms like Instagram that have rules against nudity and whatnot, you'll find page after page and thousands upon thousands of images of women from all walks of life in various stages of undress, using their sex appeal to gain followers and in some cases make large amounts of money while doing so. And this leads me to another perception from the past that I think has also now been undermined by this social media phenomenon. There was this idea that women who made a living in erotic entertainment, that they only did so because they were desperate or limited in some way. The assumption was that these women had poor life circumstances, addiction issues, a history of abuse. Perhaps they couldn't get ahead because of sexism, limited opportunities, the so-called glass ceiling. But certainly this idea has been undermined by social media. I mean, if you look at the women featured in these types of media, you'll find that they're not broke, desperate, down-and-out types. These are women who, for the most part, have solid prospects in life. Athletes, college women, models, actresses, career and professional women, women born into wealth or at least stable financial situations. It seems like I come across an article on a weekly basis that discusses some woman who decides to leave a really good, respectable job in order to do OnlyFans. This one article in particular caught my attention because it reminded me of my experiences in the legal industry. As a side note, it should be known that more women than men go to law school these days. And you have to ask, why would a woman with a good, solid lawyer job decide to do OnlyFans? And the obvious answer is for the money. Think about it. If you could make in 1 month what you would make in an entire year, some people find that temptation to be just too much. And I really do think this issue is just that simple. Sometimes we complicate issues in society, and people do this in order to push agendas. The fact of the matter is, some women realize they can use their sexuality to make money, and they either have no moral compunction about doing so, or they choose to put those morals aside and make a kind of Faustian bargain in order to get ahead in life. And to me, this is all rather obvious. It's also obvious why, in spite of all this evidence, there are still those who persist in this notion that women are being exploited. And again, that's because it serves certain agendas. There are those who will feign concern for these women. I suspect that their motives are not so noble. I doubt that those who talk so much about this objectification that they have much concern for the virtue or the well-being of women. I tend to think they're more motivated by self-serving impulses. I came across another article the other day from the New York Times. This one was entitled, "New Endorsements for College Athletes Resurface an Old Concern, Sex Sells." And the article goes on to decry the fact that many of these athlete women are using their looks instead of their athleticism to gain popularity, to make money, etc. And this just doesn't sit well with certain people. One of the individuals quoted in the article, a successful college women's basketball coach, one Tara Vanderveer. She thinks this is a step back for women. The exact quote that she uses is as follows: "I guess sometimes we have this swinging pendulum where we maybe take 2 steps forward and then we take a step back. We're fighting for all the opportunities to compete, to play, to have resources, to have facilities, to have coaches, and all the things that go with Olympic caliber athletics. This is a step back." Now, I suspect that it doesn't sit well with the Miss Vanderveers of the world that 20-year-olds with limited life and job experience are becoming millionaires by taking bikini selfies. But I think this is a problem. It's been a problem throughout history. Women who are not willing or not able to use their sex appeal will sometimes have resentment towards those who are willing and able to use it. But while this is an example of women resenting other women, this resentment always goes back to men. Because in the minds of these resentful women, it's men who drive the demand for all of this stuff. The article goes on to say that many post suggestive images of themselves that seem to cater to the male gaze. Now, this concept of the male gaze, what it implies is that there's something fundamentally wrong with men and with what they find attractive in women and with how they assess the attractiveness of women. And I think this is where some women really start to justify their hatred of men. It's become not only acceptable but fashionable these days to trash men, to berate men, to blame men, to portray men as creeps and exploiters and perverts. And it's not just the resentful types that do this either. It never ceases to amaze me how some of these women who profit mightily off of a male viewership, how they're very cavalier about trashing men as well. That's why you'll have these goofy videos of women going into fitness centers half naked and then creep shaming the men that they think are looking at them. There's a hilarious Simpsons-inspired meme that's going around the internet that I think perfectly captures this trend. There are those who seem to get a kick out of teasing out male attention and then berating the very men who give them the attention that they seek. It should be apparent to us now, though, that in the social media age, this is completely wrong. And it should also be obvious now that, at a minimum, men are not solely to blame for the explosion of pornography and the over-sexualization of our culture. Only in a society that has become too comfortable with misandry would we ever think that the hardworking men who spend their money on women who give them mere images or fleeting moments of attention, that those men are somehow oppressors or exploiters. Let me also make clear that I'm not trying to justify the habits of men who consume this type of media, nor am I shaming or passing judgment on the women featured in this type of media. Whether or not this type of entertainment is healthy or moral, that's a whole different discussion for another time. I'm merely trying to describe modern media accurately. And the truth of the matter is we don't have media that exploits and objectifies women. The more accurate description is that we have many women who willingly choose to use media to objectify themselves, and sometimes make a fortune in the process.